My husband looked me in the eyes and called me a leech in front of the woman he'd been sleeping with for 8 months. And the worst part, for 3 full seconds, I almost believed him. I want you to remember that feeling. That tiny gap between hearing something monstrous and realizing it's a lie. Because I lived in that gap for 11 years. And on the day my marriage ended, I finally climbed out of it. My name is Alina Marsh. I was 36 years old when my husband stood in the living room of the house I bought, holding the hand of a woman half my age, and told me I was nothing. That I'd never worked a real day. That everything I had because of him. I let him finish, and then I smiled, and I said 4 words that made his mistress go pale. This house is mine. But to understand why those 4 words mattered so much, you have to go back. Back to where it all started falling apart, quietly, the way houses don't collapse all at once. They rot from the inside first, and nobody notices until the ceiling comes down. I met Daniel Marsh when I was 24. I was a junior architect back then, working 60-hour weeks at a small firm downtown, living off vending machine coffee and stubbornness. He was a loan officer at the bank that financed my very first project, a boutique renovation that honestly shouldn't have gotten approved. I fought for that loan for 6 weeks. He was the one who finally said yes. I used to joke that he believed in me before I believed in myself. I don't joke about that anymore. We got married 2 years later. Small wedding, my mother crying happy tears, his mother sizing up my dress like she was pricing it. I didn't think much of that look back then. I think about it now more than I'd like to admit. The house that would later become the center of everything, came into my life the year I turned 29. My grandmother, Ruth, left it to me when she passed. Not to my brother, not split between us. To me, specifically, by name, in a will she'd updated herself with her own lawyer 4 years before she died. "You're the one who sees things through, Alina," she told me once, sitting on that very porch with a cup of tea going cold in her hands. "Your brother starts things, you finish them. This house needs someone who finishes things." I cried for 2 days after the funeral, and then I moved in with my new husband into my grandmother's house, and I told myself this was the beginning of something solid, something permanent. I was wrong about the permanent part. I wasn't wrong about the solid part. The house itself never betrayed me. People did. For the first few years, it was good. Or I thought it was good, which I've learned is not always the same thing. Daniel left the bank and started his own financial consulting business. I supported that. I believed in that. I used almost $60,000 of my savings, money I'd earned from 3 separate design contracts, to help him get it off the ground. He promised to pay it back once things stabilized. I never once brought it up again after that first year, because that's what you do when you love someone, you stop counting. I kept working too. Freelance architecture projects, smaller ones, because someone needed to keep steady income coming in while his business found its footing. I renovated half the house myself, literally, with my own hands, sanding down the floors my grandmother used to walk on, repainting the kitchen a soft sage green because I remembered her saying she always wanted that color and never got around to it. Every dollar that went into that house after Daniel moved in, every single one came from me. The new roof 4 years ago after the storm. Mine. The kitchen renovation. Mine. Property taxes every single year. Mine. Daniel's business never quite took off. Not in the way he'd promised. There were good months, and there were months where I quietly moved money between accounts so he wouldn't have to feel it, so he wouldn't have to sit with the shame of it. I told myself I was protecting him. I told myself that's what partnership looked like. Looking back, I think I was protecting myself too, from a truth I didn't want to face. The truth is, somewhere around year 7, Daniel stopped looking at me like a partner and started looking at me like a resource. It happened slowly. A comment here, a joke there made in front of friends about how I run the household budget like a tiny dictator. Laughter around the table. My laughter too, because what else do? You laugh along at your own diminishment so nobody sees how much it costs you. Then the comments got sharper, less like jokes. "You wouldn't understand, Alina. You've never had to build something from nothing." I remember standing at the sink when he said that, water running over a plate I wasn't really washing anymore, just holding under the tap. I remember thinking, I built this. I built you, some nights when you couldn't get out of bed after a bad client call. I built this house back up plank by plank, but I didn't say it. I just turned the water off and went to bed early. That became a pattern too, turning the water off, going to bed early, swallowing things. I found out about Priya on a Tuesday. I remember it was a Tuesday because Tuesdays were the day I picked up dry cleaning, and I was standing in the dry cleaner's parking lot when I saw the notification light up on Daniel's laptop, which he'd left open on the passenger seat while he ran inside for coffee. I wasn't snooping. I want to be honest about that because I think honesty matters even in the parts of a story that make you look small. I glanced at the screen the way anyone glances at a lit-up phone, and there it was, a message thread. Her name, Priya, and beneath it, a message that made my stomach drop somewhere below the car floor. Can't wait for tonight. Tell your wife you have a client dinner again, lol. The quotation marks around wife did something to me that I still can't fully explain. It wasn't the affair itself, not in that first second. It was the punctuation. Like I'd been reduced to something that needed air quotes. Like the word itself, applied to me, was almost funny to them. I didn't confront him that day. I know that might sound strange, but I've learned something about pain like that, the kind that arrives all at once, fully formed. It doesn't make you loud right away. It makes you quiet. It makes you calculating, almost against your will. Some old, buried part of my brain took over and said, don't react yet. Gather everything first. Understand what you're dealing with. So I did. I spent the next 4 months living two lives. On the surface, I was the same Alina cooking dinner, asking about his day, laughing a little too easily at his jokes. Underneath, I was building a file, bank statements, property records, the original deed to the house, still in my name only, exactly as my grandmother had left it. Every receipt for every renovation I'd paid for, every wire transfer I'd sent his failing business. Every single piece of paper that told the true story of our marriage, the one written in numbers instead of feelings, because I had learned by then that feelings could be twisted, but numbers didn't lie, and numbers didn't cheat. I found out things about Priya, too. She was 26. She worked at the same co-working space Daniel rented a desk in, and she wasn't just a fling, the way I'd almost hoped, in some small, foolish corner of my heart. She'd been in the picture for 8 months. 8 months of client dinners. 8 months of me washing his shirts and never once smelling anything different because he was careful, because he'd apparently gotten good at being careful. The betrayal wasn't just the affair. It was the performance. It was watching a man eat dinner across from me, ask about my design deadlines, kiss my forehead before bed, while carrying an entire second life in his pocket like it weighed nothing at all. I met with a lawyer in the 4th month. Her name was Carla Whitfield, and she had the kind of calm, unshakable energy I desperately needed to borrow, because I had none of my own left by then. The house is yours, she told me, flipping through the deed I'd brought her, the inheritance documents, my grandmother's will. Solely yours. Inherited, never transferred, never added to jointly. Legally, Daniel has no ownership claim to this property. None. He doesn't know that, I said. I don't think he's ever actually read the deed. He just assumes, because he lives there. Because he thinks marriage means everything gets split 50-50, no matter whose name is on what. Carla looked at me for a long moment. Do you want to tell him now, or do you want to let this play out? And here's the truth I have to admit, even now, even knowing how it all ended. A small, wounded part of me wanted to watch it play out. I wanted to see how far he'd go. I wanted to know exactly what kind of man I'd given 11 years to, before I let him know that the ground he thought he was standing on had never once belonged to him. Let it play out, I said, a little longer. I didn't know yet how far that would go. I didn't know that in 6 weeks, I'd be standing in my own living room, listening to my husband tell his mistress that I was a leech, that I'd contributed nothing, that everything, the house, the furniture, the years belonged to him. I didn't know that Priya would be standing there too, in my grandmother's living room, wearing an expression like she already owned the walls around her. But I knew this much. When that day came, I would be ready. I had the papers. I had the truth. And I had 11 years of silence finally about to end. What I didn't tell Carla that day, what I could barely admit to myself, was that some quiet, aching part of me still hoped I was wrong. That maybe there was an explanation. That maybe the man I married for 11 years hadn't actually turned into someone who could look at me and see nothing but a bank account with a face. I got my answer on a Sunday afternoon in October. I'd come home early from a site visit, my bag still slung over my shoulder, keys in hand, expecting an empty house the way I usually did on weekends when Daniel claimed he had calls with clients. I heard voices before I even got the door fully open. His voice. And a woman's laugh, light, easy, comfortable in a way that made my chest go tight. I stood in the doorway of my own home and watched my husband sitting on my grandmother's sofa, his arm draped along the back of it, while Priya walked through the living room like she was inspecting it, running her fingers along the mantel, studying the built-in shelves I'd sanded and refinished myself 2 summers ago. "It's a beautiful house," she said, not even noticing me yet. "Once we're settled, I really think we should redo this whole room. It's very dated." Dated? She was talking about my grandmother's house like it was a fixer-upper she was already planning to gut. "Once we're settled," Daniel said, and there was something in his voice, an ease, a comfort, that told me this wasn't the first time they'd had this conversation. "It'll be ours soon enough." That's when he saw me. I wish I could tell you there was a dramatic silence, some cinematic freeze-frame moment. There wasn't. Daniel just sighed, the way you sigh at an inconvenience, at a delay in your schedule, and said, "Alina, you're early." Not "I'm sorry," not "this isn't what it looks like." Just annoyance that I'd interrupted his plans a few hours ahead of schedule. I set my bag down slowly. I remember focusing very hard on breathing normally because my whole body wanted to shake and I refused to let it. Not yet, not in front of her. "Apparently," I said. "Am I interrupting something?" Priya had the decency to look uncomfortable for about half a second. Daniel did not. "You know what, Alina, let's just talk about this like adults," he said, standing up, smoothing his shirt like he was preparing for a business meeting instead of the end of his marriage. "I've been trying to figure out how to say this for a while. Priya and I, we're together. It's serious. And honestly, I think it's time we talked about the house." "The house," I repeated. "You know I put everything into this marriage," he said, and his voice was climbing now, gathering that particular righteous heat men get when they've rehearsed a speech in their heads so many times they've started to believe it. "I built my business. I supported this household. Your business," I said quietly, "that I put $60,000 into." That's not the point." He waved a hand like he was swatting the number away, like 11 years of financial reality was a fly buzzing near his face. "The point is, I am not walking away from this marriage with nothing. You've had a roof over your head this whole time because of me. You've had stability because of me. And frankly, Alina, you've contributed a fraction of what I have to this household. Design projects here and there. It's not the same as building an actual career." Something in my chest went very still. Not sad still, cold still. "A fraction," I repeated. "You know what I mean." He glanced at Priya, and I watched him find courage in her presence, the way certain men only ever seem to grow spines when they've got an audience clapping for them. "You've basically been living off me for years. Comfortable little life, no real financial pressure. I'm not saying it in a cruel way. I'm just saying, let's be honest about who's actually been carrying who in this marriage." Priya, emboldened now too, tilted her head with something close to pity on her face. "It's okay, Alina. Change is hard. But maybe it's time you thought about, supporting yourself, standing on your own for once." And there it was. Leech. He didn't use the word out loud in that exact moment. Not yet, that came seconds later. But it was already sitting in the room with us, ugly and unmistakable, dressed up in his condescending calm and her borrowed confidence. 2 people, standing in a house neither of them had ever paid a single tax bill on, informing me that I was the one who hadn't contributed. "So," Daniel continued, and his voice actually softened like he thought he was being generous, "here's what I'm thinking. We sell the house, split it fairly, I'll even be generous, 60-40, given everything I've put into building our life here, and you use your half to get back on your feet. Find an apartment. Figure out your next chapter. 60-40, I said. In your favor, he clarified, as if I should be thanking him. I felt Priya's eyes on me, waiting for the tears, the pleading, the collapse she'd clearly been told to expect from the pathetic, dependent wife. I felt Daniel waiting for it, too. 11 years of watching me shrink myself smaller and smaller had taught him to expect exactly one reaction from me. Silence, retreat, acceptance. I almost laughed, not because any of it was funny, because for the first time in months, the fear was gone, and in its place was something clean and sharp and entirely mine. You called me a leech, I said, my voice even, steady. Just now, that's the word you were circling around, wasn't it? Living off you, contributing nothing, comfortable little life. Daniel's jaw tightened. I didn't say leech. You didn't have to. I set my bag down on the entry table, my grandmother's entry table, the one with the small chip in the corner from where I dropped my keys on it 100 times over the years. And I looked at both of them, standing in the middle of my living room like they were already measuring it for new furniture. Let's talk about the house, then, since you brought it up. There's nothing to talk about, Daniel said. We sell it, we split it 60-40 and… Actually, I said, this house is mine. The room went quiet in a way I can still feel, even now, telling you this story. Priya's expression shifted first, that easy, pitying confidence draining out of her face like someone had pulled a plug somewhere behind her eyes. What are you talking about? Daniel said, but there was a flicker in his voice now, a crack. My grandmother left me this house, I said. Solely. In her will, updated 4 years before she died with her own lawyer naming me specifically. Not us. Me. It was never marital property, Daniel, because it was never purchased during our marriage. It was inherited, and inherited property stays separate unless I specifically added your name to the deed, which I never did. That can't be right. We've lived here for. Living somewhere doesn't make you an owner. I kept my voice level, almost gentle, which I think unsettled him more than shouting would have. You can go check the county records yourself. It's public information. My name, only my name. It's been that way since the day my grandmother passed. I watched Priya take a small step back from him, like his ownership of the house had been part of some equation she'd done in her head. Some calculation about what this relationship was worth to her, and the number had just changed dramatically. But you paid for the renovations, Daniel said, grasping now, his voice losing that rehearsed, confident edge. The kitchen, the roof, that has to count for something legally that has to. I paid for those, I said. With my own money, from my own contracts. I have every receipt, every wire transfer. Every bank statement going back 11 years, including the $60,000 I gave your business, which, by the way, I have documented too, in case you were ever tempted to pretend that never happened. Elena, you said I contributed a fraction, I continued, and here, finally, my voice did shake a little, not from weakness, but from the sheer release of 11 years of silence finally breaking open. You said I've been comfortable, living off you, no financial pressure. Daniel, I have paid every property tax bill on this house since the day we moved in. I renovated half of it with my own hands. I kept your business afloat more than once with money you never paid back. And you stood in my dead grandmother's living room and called me a leech. Priya was very quiet now. She wasn't looking at the shelves anymore. She wasn't looking at anything, really, except the door. I think, she said slowly, I should go. Priya, wait. Daniel reached for her arm, and she stepped back from him just slightly, just enough that I saw it. Just enough that I understood something about her, too, that whatever she'd been chasing, it hadn't been him. It had been the life she assumed came attached to him. The house, the stability, the comfortable little existence she'd accused me of having, apparently unaware she'd been auditioning to steal it. I think I need to think about some things, she said, and picked up her bag from the armchair and left without looking back at either of us. The door clicked shut behind her, and for a moment, it was just Daniel and me, standing in the wreckage of 11 years in a house that had never once belonged to him. "Elena," he started, and his voice had changed completely now, smaller, uncertain, the righteous heat drained out of it entirely. "Look, I didn't mean it like that, I was just—" "You meant every word," I said quietly. "You've meant it for years, you just finally said it out loud." I walked past him to the small drawer in the hallway console, the one where I'd started keeping a folder 6 weeks earlier, and I set it on the table between us. Bank statements, the deed, photos of every renovation with dated receipts attached. 11 years of my life, documented in ink because I'd learned, too late but not too late enough, that love isn't proof of anything, and paper is. "I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago," I said. "My lawyer has all of this. You'll be hearing from her formally by the end of the week. I'd get one of your own if I were you, a good one. You're going to need it, given the business loan you never repaid." He stared at the folder like it might bite him. "You've been planning this." "I've been surviving this," I corrected him. "There's a difference." I want to tell you that he apologized, that there was some final, redemptive conversation where he understood what he'd done, where 11 years of quiet erosion suddenly made sense to him, and he wept and asked for forgiveness. That's not what happened. He left 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a storage unit rental, and the last thing he said to me, standing in the doorway of a house he just learned he never owned, was, "You always did think you were better than me." I didn't think that. I never had. I had only ever wanted to be his equal, and somewhere along the way, without noticing exactly when, I'd let him convince me I was less than that instead. The divorce took 8 months. It was, by every legal measure, remarkably simple, because the house was never in question, and the financial records I'd kept made every other piece of it fall into place with a kind of clean, quiet inevitability. Priya, I later heard through mutual friends, hadn't lasted much longer with him after that afternoon. Turns out it's difficult to build a future with a man whose entire foundation, quite literally, belonged to someone else. I still live in that house. I repainted the living room last spring, not because anything was wrong with it, but because I wanted it to feel like mine again, fully, without the residue of that Sunday afternoon still hanging in the corners. I planted new flowers along the front walk, the same ones my grandmother used to grow, the ones I'd forgotten about until I found an old photo of her kneeling in that same dirt 40 years earlier. Some nights I sit on the porch where she used to sit, tea going cold in my hands the way hers always did, and I think about what she told me the day she left me this house. "You're the one who finishes things." I didn't understand, back then, how much that sentence would come to mean. I thought she was talking about renovation projects, about deadlines, about the kind of quiet competence she'd always seen in me. I understand now that she was talking about something larger, about the courage it takes to finish a story instead of abandoning it halfway through, even when the ending isn't the one you originally hoped for. I didn't get the marriage I thought I was building for 11 years, but I got something else instead, a house with my name on every page of its history, a quiet kind of peace I'd forgotten was even possible, and the certainty, finally, that I had never once been a leech. I had simply, for too long, been the only one who never asked for credit. I don't need it anymore. The walls around me already know the truth. They always did.